G'day, my name is Trevor Young and welcome to Earn the Right. This is the audio platform for reputation-based authority building and all that entails, which is quite a bit. And we're here to help you turn your hard-earned credibility into recognition and that recognition into opportunity for your brand. Let's get into today's featured track from the trenches. Now, we used to think discovery was all about search rankings and media coverage. You've got to get featured, you've got to get linked, get found, but something fundamental has shifted. Increasingly, people aren't searching and clicking through the 10 blue links on Google anymore. Well, they still are, but not as much as they used to. They're asking AI systems for answers, and those systems don't just retrieve information, they synthesize it, they summarize it, they cite it, they compress trust into a few surfaced voices. Which raises a bigger question. If generative or GenAI is becoming the interface between expertise and the audience, what determines who gets included? So today we're digging into that shift with two people who are neck deep in the GenAI space from a PR perspective. Welcome Darryl Sparey of Hard Numbers in the UK and Simon Murphy of Indigo Murphy from my hometown of Melbourne in Australia. Welcome, gents.
Hey, Trevor. Hey, Darryl.
Before we get going into the conversation, which I think will be robust, I have a feeling, knowing both of you gentlemen. But Darryl, why don't you give us a bit of a thumbnail sketch of where you fit in the world from this perspective? You run a fast-growing agency in Bournemouth, or from Bournemouth, but obviously you've got clients everywhere, but let it rip.
Thanks very much, Trevor. So Hard Numbers is the agency I set up that you refer to about 5.5 years ago with my business partner Paul Stollery. I'm based in Bournemouth. The business is based in London, so I do the kind of couple of days a week in London, and the rest of the time I'm down here. There are about 22 of us, I think now. We tend to work mostly with tech companies, but we're not exclusively a tech agency. What I would say about the kind of my experience that kind of makes me someone that has earned the right to talk about this topic is I've worked in SaaS, so I've sold SaaS solutions, media intelligence, digital, media monitoring and all of that kind of stuff. And then I ran the London office of an SEO digital marketing business for a couple of years, and then I moved into PR. So all the kind of bits that go into what you might call generative engine optimization of understanding measurement, understanding SEO, understanding digital marketing and understanding earned media are all kind of in there somewhere. So I think that's given me a platform to talk about the stuff I spend a lot of my time talking about now.
You do, and I'll just add to that you are speaking a lot now. You're in England, but you will be speaking in America, you were telling us, which is great. And so a global speaker. But you've also done a lot of research in this space, which we could dig into later, or that can come up during our chat. Mm-hmm. And you have been in the space before most people. So just want people to realise that Darryl's been doing this for quite some time. Simon, you come from the big end of town in the terms of PR, but now you're running your own show. What's your story, my friend?
Yeah, from the big end to the small end, but loving it. And so, I mean, very briefly, the key word is earned. My background is earned storytelling. I've been a PR consultant in the UK, in Asia, in Australia, not once but twice. I'm based in Melbourne now, but previously I was with Sydney, working for large agencies, principally in that kind of corporate storytelling space. And earned is really the key word. So my background is very traditional. It's always been about trying to engage traditional media and getting a point of view across and covered in editorial format, which of course lends itself to the credibility that so many brands look to try and achieve. I left the big end of town, in this case Edelman, about a year ago and set up Indigo Murphy with a goal of basically being a not only a corporate storyteller but also a B2B solution provider, and leaving the big end of town, as we put it, and then I'll park that big end of town analogy in a moment. It gave me a bit of creative space, and the one thing that I realised is there was something emerging. And Trevor, you and I have talked about this in the past, 20 years ago, with the emergence of digital and social media in particular, and how that was a real missed opportunity for the PR, or more broadly, the communications industry. And I recognised this. And also I started hearing voices like Darryl out there talking about the impact of Gen AI on reputation. And so that having left the big end of town and starting on my own and working on that kind of solution around what is the future of corporate storytelling, I realized the potential of this new channel, Gen AI. And so I've created an advisory product which is aimed at both the big end of town and the small end of town. It's very scalable and aimed at really helping in-house teams within corporates, within brands, understand the potential of earned storytelling in terms of influencing their reputation and brand visibility within Gen AI. So that's my focus. Very scalable. The other aspect of what I do now is also recognizing that in this new world that we live in, there's a convergence of disciplines. So communications, where I come from, and also marketing. Both of us are playing this game. It's exciting times. It's really new. There's going to be lots of pointy elbows for sure. But you know, I think there's an amazing opportunity for storytellers of all colours, whether it's from marketing or disciplines, from marketing or PR, to come together and really influence how their brand shows up in Gen AI. And I think we're probably going to talk about the semantics of that and the challenges and the opportunities.
Yeah, we certainly will break that down. I like everyone's using the word earned. It's a good word. I know there's a few people might drop off their chairs saying, what do you mean I've got to earn it? You can't buy it. So let's start at a really basic level, because you know, there are a lot of people talking about this now. It's hit very hard. Most people, I'd imagine, listening to this, if you've been in business or professional, you will have been playing around with AI. So I'm going to draw a line in the fact that I take it that, you know, people are already using AI, even if they're just tipping their toe in the AI waters, and have probably asked questions of it and using it for some more than others. But you know, whether they're using it more than Google or just as much as Google. I know personally I use it as a first port of call. My Google use has probably dropped about 80-90%. So I'm sure there are other people like that as well. So Darryl, why don't you kick us off? Can you walk through, when we say Gen AI, and you said Gen AI optimization, there's a lot of terms floating around. Why don't you set us straight on what we're talking about, and why does it matter?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got generative engine optimization. I've heard AI optimization. I've heard LEO, which is large language model, or optimization. I mean, you name it, I've heard it. LMAO, who knows? Anyway, it variously called different things, but at principle, it's all the same stuff, which is basically how do you potentially influence, optimize, and improve where you're positioned relative to your competitors for generic searches in relation to your product, service, or category, and how also do you improve how you show up for when people search for branded queries, you know, for your brand in relation to questions about your business practices, your corporate governance, you know, anything else like that, all within generative AI platforms like, you know, Gemini or AI overviews, or, you know, AI mode from Google, or, you know, ChatGPT from OpenAI, or, you know, Perplexity or Copilot, or, you know, all these other Gen AI platforms or AI search engines that are out there. Basically, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, and when you're saying found, well, I think we'll probably get into that a little bit deeper on the mechanics of that and how people are being found. But one thing I just want to raise here is that, you know, when we Google, we're going with intent to search for something, whereas is it fair to say with Gen AI, we're actually asking more deeper questions. I've seen stats say something like 28 to 29 words on average we're using in our prompts. Now, prompt is not a word we probably use, just like algorithm we never used, you know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, and now it's day-to-day language. We hate the algorithms, but prompting is the phrase everyone's using.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. The length of prompts is typically a lot longer. You know, historically, the average Google search was 2 words or less, you know, on average, right? But what we're seeing is that the increased usage of AI is leading to the average length of a Google search being dragged up as well. So people are putting more words into Google as well, partly because you have AI mode, AI overviews kind of baked into a lot of Google search results now as well. So you're able to generate, longer text too. So search habits more broadly are changing. So that means for the traditional search side of things, I feel a bit sick whenever I say the word traditional search. but for the traditional kind of organic search side of things are changing as well. Yep. And I think as marketing professionals, we have to adapt our strategies and approaches or whatever to everything, not just generative AI platforms as a result.
Yeah. Simon, if I'm an expert founder of, say, running a niche advisory firm or something like that, why should I care about this? Because I've got enough to do.
You do have enough to do, quite
As
right.
an owner.
But the challenge is there's more and more folk who are turning to GenAI for synthesized results. So it's not providing links, it's actually providing you with the answer. And typically human nature dictates that if you get what looks like a robust, solid answer, it's called anchor bias, you're just going to accept it at face value and go with it. And what's interesting with GenAI and GenAI search is that really there is not just a reputational benefit, there's also a commercial impact. And what's been found is that B2B commercial decision makings in particular are leading the charge within GenAI. I think Forrester's stat is somewhere around about 80 or 90% of B2B decisions are made in GenAI, which is just extraordinary, really. And consumers are actually catching up. There was an Adobe study which suggested that in the US, approximately 50% of folk were shopping in GenAI, which if you then add on the fact that there's now commercial agreements between the likes of Walmart and OpenAI, and they've really made a big dent on Amazon sales, incidentally, during holiday season. That's why, as a business owner, you need to sit up. If you're not there, then you basically don't exist. And we're increasingly seeing more and more folk turning to generative AI. I think there was something like 8 billion searches as of December on GenAI. I don't think we're going to see the end of Google search in any means. I mean, there was talk of, bye-bye SEO, which is linked with traditional search and keywords in place of GEO. It's much more complex, and I think there's going to be more conversions, and of course, Google's making a comeback. But really, if you're not there, or if you're turning up and it's wrong, then simply put, you're going to be hurting your reputation, and you're also going to be hurting your commercial potential. And I think, there's a real opportunity, particularly for those businesses where they've got an expert niche or area, to really up the ante and make sure that the content, and I know we're going to talk about, how do we influence GenAI, but making sure that GenAI is picking up what they stand for. And it's really, I see it, and I talk to my clients, it's a new channel, incredibly influential. It consumes everything, but it's really another channel which we have to influence. And if we don't show up, then we don't exist.
Yeah, good point. There used to be that old saying, and Darryl, you'll know this one well. The best place to hide a body is on page 2 of Google. Yeah. Remember that one?
Yeah.
It was a classic line. I wish I thought of that one. Simon, you just said that I picked up on something there as an aside. The Walmart did a deal or partnership with ChatGPT, was it?
I think
Does that mean we're already seeing they're buying their way in? Is that, I hadn't heard that before.
Correct. Yeah. So there's commercial partnerships now, and incidentally, we're going to see much more of this as more of these LLMs, the ChatGPTs, the Claudes, the Perplexities of the world, offer what they call a bot, an agent bot that essentially completes the commercial transaction for you. So what we're going to see over time is it'll influence the information around what you want to buy. It'll give you a very subjective, human-like answer, and then there'll be the ability for it to then just convert that into a sale. And certainly in the B2B space, where supply chain is incredibly complex and so on, we're likely to see that lead the charge. It's going to simplify purchase process immensely. So yeah, and I mean the numbers are incredible. I mean the direct impact was, I think Walmart had a 35% thereabouts increase, and that had a direct knock-on net effect on Amazon's holiday sales. So it just goes to show.
We talk about discovery, but I think another point is validation, and I want to get into that in a tick. I'll just raise that now because I think that, we might hear about someone through traditional good old word of mouth. I know, shock horror, people still talk to each other, but we'll check them out. So what will they find? But before we get into that, Darryl, walk us through, I said at the outset, and these are words that we're now using: synthesize, summarize, they're citing things. Walk us through that side. How is it working? Can you just get under the hood a little bit and tell us how that works and what they're doing and why that's different to if we Google something?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, when you search for something on a GenAI platform, so say you put into ChatGPT, is Microsoft a trustworthy company? It uses 4 different sort of sources of information to then synthesize the answer. If you ask a model, if you ask ChatGPT a hard data question like what is the capital of Australia, right? It doesn't have to do anything else. It can just look at the model data that it's trained on, and it knows the answer should be Melbourne, but of course it's Canberra. Right, and similarly, shout out to all of my friends in Sydney, and it doesn't need to do any more to answer the question, right? But for a soft data question like what is the best city in Australia, then obviously it will need to use more sources of information. So it will do a live internet search to then get the latest information about something like that. And the different platforms use different browsers or search engines. So Google, Gemini, AI overviews, AI mode obviously all use Google. ChatGPT says publicly that it uses Bing, although I've seen plenty of evidence that actually the results that you get back from citations in ChatGPT more closely resemble page 1 of Google than page 1 of Bing. So I don't completely believe what they say publicly about that. And then Claude uses Brave, Perplexity uses its own search engine. These different platforms will do different live internet search to get additional information. Then they'll also look at anything that you've put in yourself, so user input. So if you've uploaded a document or some further information or something like that, and then memory or context. I've never told ChatGPT that I'm Darryl Sparey, the MD and co-founder of Hard Numbers, etc. But it's inferred that from things I've fed it to, either about myself or blog posts I've written about myself or whatever, in my training of ChatGPT for it to do things that I want it to do. So all of that stuff gets crunched together. That's a technical term, and then it synthesizes an answer for you. So what that shows you is, the importance of all those different sources of information in terms of influencing the answer, and how no two people's search results are going to be exactly the same. So that's why it's important to test a range of different prompts when you do, an audit of how you appear, and then track those over time to see how they change or they vary over time, because that gives you a better kind of a more realistic benchmark for how you would be showing up. It's exactly the same in one way with, again, traditional Google search, whereby most people don't realize they have personalization turned on if they're Google searching via Chrome, but they're getting results that are personalized to their previous search history as well as their, and you would have to otherwise put on incognito browsing or, use a different browser or whatever to see like unpersonalized search results.
Yeah. Simon, given that, we're all in PR comms, and media relations plays a role in that, and getting in third-party media outlets, whether that's a podcast or whether it's the New York Times or, the Financial Times or the local newspaper that's still earned media, as we call it in the trade. From a PR perspective, not many PR agencies have done got into SEO. I know Darryl would know a few, and he was all over it anyway. But, it used to be that there's the technical side of SEO, but from a PR perspective, it's about getting featured, getting links back to your site, getting extra traffic. That's how it's always been. So if you write a piece for a trade journal and they put your bio in and you're lucky enough to get a link, or you do a story and for some reason you include a link and you actually get it past the editor, that's gold, and that still is gold, I would imagine. But that's the old world, the traditional world. The new world is, as we said, cited, summarized and synthesized. Earned media and getting up in other people, building your authority is still a thing. It's probably a bigger thing today than ever before. I opened it to both of you, actually. When we talk about earned media and getting cited, and the sources that GenAI tools, systems, platforms, what they're using, where do we sit with all of that? Is it pretty black and white, or is it all over the place and ever evolving? Is it like Google that the higher the authority domain, the greater the propensity of AI to surface it?
Yeah.
Let's go. That's open to both of you.
Well, I'll kick it off because you got me hot under the collar about an issue that I'm quite passionate about, and that is the role of communications and what we've traditionally done in the past, getting that feature in the local newspaper or the FT or whatever it may be. We're all very proud of that outcome. We've often said you're only as ever good as your next piece of press coverage, and that's true. In fact, it's more true in the rapid world of GenAI, because this is a beast that's evolving and changing and absorbing information all of the time. So I call it the Great Communications Reset. And I mentioned at the start, Trevor, that I think that PR folk really missed out on the digital SEO opportunity. And then you see large integrated firms or firms like, a few firms where Darryl, for example, has worked in the past, who do get it and have brought that across and merged it in with more traditional storytelling. Right now, the opportunity for PR folk is to train both and speak to both humans, as we've traditionally done, and also train the machines. Now, what's really interesting, and this is why I got in touch with Darryl over a year ago, and we formed a bit of a working relationship, is just the insight that research, for example, conducted by Hard Numbers around the importance of earned sources in training generative AI cannot be underestimated. So, Darryl, I think your late 2024 research suggested 61% is the number where that earned media drives AI answers. I've actually seen more recent research from Muckrack, which is a sort of media industry aggregator of sorts and database, and they're looking at more like 72 to 82%. And that's not just earned media, I'll point out, it's also other areas, other forums where your brand might sit. For example, if you're registered on a government website, or if you have a good Wikipedia reference. And the other area that's really important where PR people, where comms people can play a role is own media. So what sits on your website, what sits on your social media like LinkedIn, for example. All of this we control, and this is such an amazing opportunity for comms folk to step up and say, I own this beast, because it's all about driving reputation in this channel. And all of these tools, which I've been using all my working life, have a role to play in driving that influence. And I'll hand over to Darryl just a moment, but one thing I would also say is that for any particular brand, though, when you look at what's influencing it, and this is where that notion of doing a regular audit is so key, it's actually a finite number of sources that are typically driving that brand to be visible in generative AI search. So you might find there's 20 or so sources, and that might be the FT, it might be your local newspaper, it might be an association website, it might be your CEO's thought leadership on LinkedIn or your own website. But relatively speaking, it's a finite number of earned and known sources. The challenge for marketing and PR folk alike is to identify what are those that are really being trusted by the generative AI engines, and then influencing them accordingly.
Let's dig deeper, Darryl. That's a lot of things, and you've got the main ones: Copilot, Chat, GPT, Claude, Perplexity, Gemini. They're probably the top 5.
Grok.
On Grok. So are they all looking at the same things, do you know? Or is this, something so confidential we never know? Or how do we find out? Because, people have been, forever and a day for Google. For 20 years, they've been trying to game the algorithm, work it out, all of that. A lot of people say they could, they never could. Where are we up to now then? Are people trying to say these are the exact sources? Can they find out? And are they different? Are all these different platforms different?
The bad news for everyone is that, yes, the algorithms are different for every platform. And they use different sources and they work in slightly different ways. There's a really good piece of research that was done by a business called iPullRank, where they did 8,000. It's a little bit old now, probably about a year old. But
can I say that's a great name for a business?
All right, yeah, it's great, isn't it? They did about 8,000 searches on all sorts of things like what is the best mobile phone, what is the best laptop, what is the best flat screen TV, what is the best coffee shop, all these kinds of things. And what they found is that Perplexity, for example, has a semantic understanding of what the best and most reliable sources of information are relevant to different types of queries. So for queries in relation to electronics, like the flat screen TVs, mobiles, etc., it would tend to surface more content from things like Engadget and those kind of gadgety websites and things like that. For searches in relation,
credible sources,
yeah, credible sources with a kind of a vertical relevance to that particular query, right? And if it was financial stuff like what is the best stock or share to buy, or those kinds of query, or what is the best pension fund, or what is the best ETF, or those kind of questions, you tended to get things like NerdWallet and Trading 212 and content like that coming through, right? So there's like a semantic understanding of what the best sources are on a platform like Perplexity. With other channels, with other AI platforms, you tend to see more of the like very well trafficked high DA stuff coming through more frequently. So Forbes, for example, ranks for 3.4 million different search terms or something insane like that. And funnily enough, you see a lot of Forbes content coming through, particularly from any searches on like Gemini, AI overviews, or AI mode. The other thing that's quite interesting, and again, this is total black box. We don't know all of where the different AI platforms have reciprocal content copyright arrangements with copyright holders. But again, from that iPullRank survey, I think it was somewhere between 3 and 5% of all the answers cited the FT. And ChatGPT, OpenAI, has a reciprocal arrangement with the FT. The FT isn't 3 to 5% of the internet, right? So again, I've got this kind of theory that there will be some kind of algorithmic preference towards the copyright holders that they're paying, the content of the copyright holders that they're paying money to, right? That would kind of make sense. If I was paying $70 million a year to get Reddit content into my platform, you best believe I'd be showing quite a lot of Reddit content to people as a result, right? So I think that's another factor to consider as well.
It's an interesting thing where, we're talking about before, will be people advertising on ChatGPT, for example, but ChatGPT also have to now pay for the big, and they'd be only doing it with the big media companies, wouldn't they? That was and so does Google do that? Do you know?
Do you know, that's the other thing. We don't know where there are reciprocal copyright arrangements in place with different copyright holders and things like that. Yeah. So that Google has made a load of effort, well, depends who you ask, but has made efforts historically with publishers for reimbursing them for usage of their content. I think most publishers would say not enough. Yeah. But yeah, that is definitely something to watch. There's an organisation called Fairly Trained. I think it's fairlytrained.org, which is looking at this stuff and monitoring this stuff all the time, and they're an organisation I follow. I think they do a good job of trying to keep a track of this kind of stuff. But yeah, none of this stuff is spoken about publicly.
Yeah.
Where there might be a good reason for the publisher to talk about it. So I think Axel Springer announced they've done a deal with OpenAI. Some other publishers have talked about it publicly, whereas other publishers haven't. They haven't wanted to disclose the terms by which they're selling their content.
So given a lot of it's about, it is discovery, but it is reputation and validation and all of those things. So they're all different reasons for popping up. Open to both of you here. In terms of, we talk about brands that can do it, obviously, with their brand, and then products as well comes up into it. So, I mean, if you're a large company with brands and products and all sorts of, layers to it, that's an issue. But there's also the reputational side of things, the leaders, the recruitment, if you're a big end of town. And if you're smaller, you might be a genuine thought leader out there who's been pumping away in this space, and all of a sudden you've now got to pump a bit harder to pop up in different places. Walk us through that, Simon, the importance of leaders and individuals, if at all, to hopefully come up in when they're being talked about in a positive way.
100%. So AI is obviously huge, but it's not wise. Is the sort of analogy I use. It's not particularly smart. It's a feeder, and so it will take the information that you give it, or that you give to third parties, or not give, or you earn with third parties for it to pick up on. So from that point of view, I see GenAI, I'm sorry, not just OpenAI, but generative AI as a real level setter when it comes to big versus small. Because I tell you, typically the larger firms that I've gone into and spoken to, that they're sort of on the AX100 or the FTSE 500, they've all got some form of AI deployed internally, and yet the communications team and the various other teams are still struggling to figure out how to really maximize the use of just their AI tool, let alone thinking, well, how do I actually go out there and earn my influence and raise brand awareness and visibility across generative search? And so from that point of view, I see it as a bit of a level setter. We are not at ground zero. We're certainly at sort of the second or third floor right now, and it's getting more sophisticated, particularly as marketing and advertising are starting to become a reality in some parts of the world. But certainly if you are a smaller player, a specialist player, then what you have to realize is, here is your potential to make sure that your story, and it can be a deep, elaborative, depth counts more than anything else, it has to be substantive, is out there, and then test what those generative search engines know about you. And if you don't like what you're seeing, you've got the opportunity to then go and do something about it. But rest assured, some of the big end of town simply hasn't got round to that yet. So as I say, a real level setter.
Yeah, and you could be, if you're nimble and you're out there creating content, a lot of it, then that's a good thing. Let's pare it back even further. So we've talked about, the Financial Times and the big plays, but most people aren't going to get into those anyway. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of opportunities anyway for people to, and look, I'm an owned media guy first, so we'll get into the owned media, and obviously social media has been a big thing as well, and earned media to me is a lovely layer on top once you get your base done, and then you move into the earned media. Sounds like probably move a bit more quickly into the earned media today than perhaps what you would, but we've got so many vertical titles and blogs in industries and niches, and we've got Substack and podcasts. These are all things that Google has always picked up as well. Mm-hmm. So from that point of view, is it any different? It's how we've only got a finite amount of hours. We can only create so much content. For someone who's reasonably active on LinkedIn and might have a blog or whatever, wants to do some other things, Darryl, how would you suggest they allocate their efforts and their priorities if coming up in Gen AI is important to people?
Yeah, I think there's a few. So if I were someone who had my own kind of consultancy or something like that, and I had my own kind of personal brand that I wanted to, promote and promulgate and things like that, I would focus on a few things. One, from an owned perspective, and we see this with big companies that we've done this work with, but this works at every level, right? If you having a website, your own website, where you talk about yourself, you publish your own thought leadership blogs, content, etc., making sure that if there's an about you page on that site, that it is as up to date as it possibly can be, with all the latest facts and figures and all the rest of it about yourself, and that you tell your personal story as fulsomely as you possibly can there. Because we've seen, these platforms will do a live internet search to get the latest stuff on someone, and if you have a website and it appears highly obviously for your name, then that is going to be a source that's going to be used a lot. I would also think about any sources which you see getting cited a lot about other people in your sector, or if you ask questions about, if you're a thought leader in the digital marketing space or something, and you type a prompt into ChatGPT or any of the other platforms for, like, who are the top 10 global thought leaders in digital marketing, or who is the top 10 global, top 10 thought leaders in digital marketing in Australia, or Miami, or wherever globally, right? Just to and then see who comes up, and then see what sources are cited and things like that, as whether those are owned media or earned media or wherever else. And for where those are earned media outlets, if they're marketing titles that talk about the trade of marketing, then see how you could get bylines or comment or things like that published within those outlets, because that you'll have seen from your own testing that those are sources that get surfaced in relation to those kinds of topic areas. One other thing that I would think about is anything that generates a lot of text. No, that sounds daft, but these are large language models, right? So if you go on a podcast that someone else's podcast that produces a full transcript, on their website after the event, or if you have your own podcast, make sure you publish as full a transcript as you can of the interview, for example, afterwards. All those kinds of things. Also, anything that, to your point, Trevor, Google, funnily enough, loves Google content. So anything that goes on YouTube is helpful from this. So again, if you are interviewed anywhere that publishes that interview on YouTube, that's helpful for you too.
And also having your own YouTube channel, I guess.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. And so, are we talking depth? It sounds like depth is more important than. Look, there are people obviously out there trying to game the system already. They always are. But what used to work, and in Google days, in the old days, wouldn't work with this, where it's be everywhere. This is be in enough places strategically with depth. Would that be a fair call?
Yeah, and I would focus on the, if you can, test a number of different prompts and see what are the sources which are most frequently coming up in relation to your product, service category, your area of expertise, whatever that is, and then focus your time and effort on those kinds of sources.
Yeah.
I saw someone, I think they were a senior communicator from Airbnb, and he did generate a little bit of heat on LinkedIn about this recently, where he said you should, people always used to talk about tier one media lists. Well, what you should build now is like your like AI platform media list of the titles that you get. I don't actually think that's that bad an idea, but I don't think you should do that exclusively. Right, no. Just like in the
just do it anyway. Just do it anyway, whether it's AI or not. If you're trying to build your profile, whatever AI is sourcing is great anyway. I would imagine.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. It's exactly that. It's just like in the old days with when there was only really one show in town, and that was Google from a digital perspective, and you would say, don't do anything just because Google wants you to do it because it has an impact on the user, it's useful for the reader, or or whatever, right?
Well, PR people would think that way. PR people would certainly think that way.
Right, yeah, I think triangulate now between the three things, right? Which is basically think about the user or the reader, think about traditional search, but also think about AI impact. And anything which is sort of in the center of that triangle, or if it was a Venn diagram, the middle of the three circles, that's where you should be spending your time and effort if you want to have maximum impact generally online and on how you're found.
I'm going to come back to that in a tick, but I've got a question for Simon. We've talked before about, I've got that theory around the rolling thunder strategy where you start small, because Darryl just talked about tier one media, and that's PR speak for the very big titles and the talkback radio, commercial radio, and the major news programs, tier one. But, that might be relevant for people, but more often than not it won't be. But this rolling thunder where you start small in the small rooms and build up, or the small media outlets, and you build up and you build up and you build up, that sort of still fits with this, because some of the smaller aspects might actually come up reasonably well in AI.
Yeah, it's remarkable, and again, it's about being curious and asking AI, putting in those prompts, those questions, and seeing what the sources there are. But basically, I look at it as a sort of 3-layer authority stack, and you've got your structured own content, which Darryl mentioned a moment ago. The stuff that exists on your own site, your FAQs and your service pages and so on. You want to make sure that they're as clearly structured as possible, but written for humans, but clearly structured so that they can also be read by machines.
And blog posts. Blog posts as well.
Yeah, and blog posts as well. Yeah, incredibly important. And blog posts actually, and this is where we talked about links earlier. Of course, links in AI tend not to get clicked on, so you can't really measure it, and that's quite technical. I know it's more about brand mention. But if you're putting a blog post on and it references a third-party entity, then I think, and Darryl, correct me if I'm wrong, but AI quite likes that, because it's a form of validation that says, your content's accurate, you've been cited elsewhere when it does its search. The second layer is that consistent entity presence, so having a presence on LinkedIn, directories, Wikipedia, of course, if you can get in, which is a very difficult form to get onto. And then earned validation doesn't have to be the FT; it can be a quote in a relevant trade title where your audience is, because you obviously have to think about being audience centric. So don't think it just means the FT or the Financial Review in Australia. It means being where your audience is and going to a source that GenAI regards as being trusted.
So you mentioned LinkedIn.
Yep.
What's the go with LinkedIn and AI?
That is a really interesting question, because right now, I've heard mixed things. I've heard social media doesn't really show up in GenAI. In fact, Darryl, I think the research that I was talking about you did a year or so ago, I think it was a sort of 1 or 2% influence on GenAI outcomes. But that said, I think LinkedIn has increased and gone up the rankings. And bear in mind, this is still the Wild West. So Reddit, for example, which is another...
which is the Wild West.
It is the Wild West, of course. At one point, it was seen as number 1 or 2, and then suddenly there was a switch around in OpenAI's algorithm, and it dropped. But what we have seen is that LinkedIn has increased up the influence rankings of late. It's a challenging one. Darryl might have a bit more about...
Before I go to Darryl on that, I've put LinkedIn articles or profiles in it before when I'm doing research, and it said I can't get access to it. Yeah. But then sometimes I've done it and it can get access to it. So I'm a little in the dark about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're seeing more LinkedIn content getting surfaced, to Simon's point, getting surfaced in response to different prompts that we're testing and things like that than we have seen historically. And honestly, I don't know the reason for that. If I were guessing, and I never like to guess, but if I were guessing, if you think about it, Microsoft owns LinkedIn. Yeah. Microsoft owns Bing. Publicly, ChatGPT says it uses Bing. For search. So you would think that with traditional search, LinkedIn on Bing, LinkedIn would appear highly. Therefore, LinkedIn should be appearing, more highly, more frequently, etc. within ChatGPT, for example, search results. One other thing as well that I've seen on Google over the course of the past couple of years is historically, and I still am in the owned camp, by the way, Trevor, right? I'm still like, don't rent your land, like build on your own land, right?
Yep.
Or don't build on rented land, build on your own land. However, I've seen more long form LinkedIn content getting surfaced for searches like what is bin sponsorship, or what is open banking, or what, things like that. So like long form technical, like 2,000, 3,000 word, posts giving a lot of depth on a particular subject. I've seen like page 1 of Google have at least one piece of LinkedIn content like that coming through.
Yeah, Google, it does pop up in Google often now. It certainly does. Certainly profiles do, but I've seen articles as well.
Yeah.
But my theory is, use LinkedIn anyway, because your audience is probably there. You still need to be 100%. Having people will search for you there. And if it gets surfaced elsewhere, that's a bonus. Really.
Yeah,
I wouldn't be using LinkedIn to try and do that, or I wouldn't not be using LinkedIn if it doesn't get up into AI. I'd be going hell for leather at LinkedIn anyway, as much as it's annoying people at the moment. But, what is your optimum mix of channels as a leader, an expert, personal brand, for your business brand, whatever it is? You've still got to work that out. And then, as you said earlier, layer in, and I'm going to draw you back into it now, layer this AI in as an overlay of what else can you do for that. So you said before, if you looked at it as a triangle, or you did go Venn diagram, but I like the triangle. We had pyramid, we had right for humans, structure for SEO, structure for AI. Okay, writing for humans, we should get. I think most people would understand that. Human stories, human language, that side of things. When you say structure, you went as far before as saying your about page. Simon added to it FAQs and products and services, and be very, very clear. Could you just walk us through that? If people are saying, well, I've got a website, how am I going to structure it? If I'm going to put blog posts on there, do I have some cornerstone content like I used to for Google? Do I now do that for AI? Just there's about 10 questions in that. Thanks.
Yeah. I'll do my best to answer at least 5 of them. So there's a couple. I think about it in a couple of different ways, right? I think it's about how you write and how you structure content, and then it's also layering on top of it there's some kind of technical on-site stuff for this as well. All of this, by the way, might sound like sort of traditional SEO stuff, because with traditional SEO you had technical on-site, right, on-site copy, and then off-site links in the old days of you talked about digital PR. Well, now it's citations, right? But it's all kind of similar framework of thinking about this stuff. Where it gets slightly different. So, firstly, long form structured content that clearly is written in a way to help answer questions. So Simon talked about FAQ content, but also if you think about if you've got any long form explainer content on your site around what is your category or what is your product or service or whatever, most people tend to have that. Make sure that's structured in a way that for each of your subject headers, for example, write it as closely as you can to a question as possible, and make sure that you're using schema markup on that page, so that you're marking up all of the different entities on that page, so it is as machine readable as possible, and therefore most likely to get picked up by AI platforms. There's, without getting too technical, there's ways in which you should apply schema markup that will be helpful for LLMs, there's other ways in which you can apply schema markup that doesn't. But basically, apply schema markup, apply it in the right way, structure your content on site, and therefore you're making your content as machine readable as you possibly can.
And ask ChatGPT how to do that.
Exactly. I'll just add to Darryl's making. I like the analogy of answering a question, because that is effectively what you're trying to do, and that's how you figure out what ChatGPT or your preferred LLM is looking for. You ask it the question and see what answer it comes up with, and then that's how, in your category, in your niche area, you then try and provide that information in a form that it eats. The other aspect, and we talked about the triangle, but the other important aspect also is, this is not a set and forget exercise, and I'm sorry I'm talking in cliches here, but the other aspect, of course, is monitoring and then adjusting, because, as we've already discussed earlier in the conversation, this is a moving feast the whole time. And what might seem on the ball right here and now, in 3 months' time, the algorithm might have changed, and you might be not being picked up, or it might be inaccurate. So really, that kind of brand science, that measurement, and there's a bunch of tools, and we won't necessarily get into technicalities here, but just knowing and then auditing against what you previously were aiming for is really key for sort of staying visible.
It's a good point, and I've read that quite a few times from others in the space, where it's about consistency and freshness, whereas Google wasn't as much. I mean, Google would throw up stuff from years ago. If it was an authoritative site and an article that got a lot of links and everything, you would keep coming up, as I understand it. But with AI, it wants fresh. And obviously there's two parts to that. It wants fresh. Obviously they're crawling stuff all the time. But the AI itself, the platforms themselves are changing all the time. I mean, Claude's just brought out, what is it, 4.6, is it, or something like that?
I think it was 4.6.
Yeah. And that's a big jump from previously. So those are things that, yes, have your basic stuff, but that would be your about page and all this, the evergreen stuff on your website and all of that, those sorts of things. But the freshness, I guess, would come from more your earned media and your own blogging, and if you're on YouTube, and your own content. Am I right in that? Is that fair to say?
And for things like fresh content, make sure that you've got a dedicated news section on your website where you publish your press releases, and that those are date time stamped and all the rest of it, so that they're clearly marked for that. One other thing I'll just say about freshness of content, things like that, and it goes back to the About Us page point I made earlier. My business partner Paul's got a good line for this. He says the About Us page of most companies is like the forgotten child, right? Actually, and it's in part because with traditional search, the homepage is, for 90% of businesses out there, the most traffic page on the site, right? Like 76.3% of all statistics are made up on the spot, but about 90% of traffic from traditional search to or the page that gets the most traffic from traditional search on most websites is the homepage. In a post-AI world, we see like the About Us page as being one of always in the top 5 most traffic is referred from AI search platforms, right? When the data's right? We had an instance recently when there was a bank that we were talking to where they'd asked a branded question about the bank, and their website and their About Us page wasn't returned in the result. What was returned was a recent Earned Media article about the business on a third-party website, a press release they distributed, again on a third-party website, on Business Wire or something like that, and an Instagram post from their from the latest Instagram post from their Instagram channel. And the reason was that the question contained something about how many employees or the size of the business or whatever. And the number of employees was consistent across those 3 sources. And the number that was on the About Us page was different, and it was out of date. Wow. And the LLM couldn't corroborate the information. So it cited the most
and took social media.
Sources. right? And one of the sources was social media. But again, two of the other sources were like offsite and, again, showing the importance of PR, right? So that's really interesting. So I think keeping that About Us page up to date, making sure that anywhere you have how many employees, what percentage of the FTSE 100 you work with, or the Fortune 500 you work with, or whatever, how many states you're located in, or how many office locations you've got, or how many countries you're in globally, all of those stats, numbers, facts and figures need to be correct on your About Us page, and they need to be correct across your site, so that if the LLM looks at two different pages on your website, it can corroborate that information and know that it's accurate.
So this is for the branded mentions when people are searching for a brand. Yeah. So if people are searching for you personally, your company, the organisation you work for, whether they're people who talent or potential clients or whatever it is, get that. I just want to get to the basics now. That's the bottom of the pyramid. Just build up. Make sure you've got all that stuff, because that's when your brand is strong. People are going to ask for you. And to my mind, the strongest position anyone can be in is not forget discovery. It's nice, but if you're ahead of discovery because people are already talking about you in other channels, that's a bonus. And for smaller businesses, that's enough. If people can go to ChatGPT or Claude or Perplexity and ask about you and your reputation, that's really important. So that's the branded mentions, and the discovery mentions will be when people are putting in what's the who's the main thinker in this space, or that sort of thing. There's those two distinct areas, isn't there? Conscious of time, lads, I just want to go back to this one thing, because we have talked about earned media, and again I'll just say that earned media is those when other people are talking about you. So whether you're in a newspaper being quoted, you got a profile in an industry trade journal, you do a guest post for a blog, you're on someone's podcast or YouTube channel, etc., etc. So there's a lot of channels. There's a lot of channels out there. Some people, if you're an active leader, thought leader, expert, you're creating content, you're already doing things, those opportunities probably come up anyway. You're asked to speak somewhere, that's earned media, and you'll be in the an online summit or something like that. That's an authority signal right there. Am I right in saying that it's probably more important now, rather than just leave it inbound and reactive? So yes, I'll be on your podcast. Yes, I'll do this. Yes, I can contribute a story. That you go, because media relations has always been proactive and reactive. Do you think proactive is more important now than ever before, if you believe reputation's important for the success of your business, and you want to be surfaced, love that word, surfaced in AI? Should people now make extra outbound for being in magazines, newspapers, radio, whatever? Is that something they should put in their kit bag now? We need to up our game in that, and not just be inbound.
Well, I for 100% say yes, and the reason being is that AI amplifies the gap between those who articulate their expertise clearly and those who don't. And here's your edge. If you can own a tight niche with clearly structured expertise, then you're winning. But get it out there, get your story out there.
And keep doing it.
Regularly.
Darryl, what would your advice be to someone who wants to get out there and get known for themselves, but discovered and brand mentioned as well, reputation-wise?
Yeah, absolutely. Without, at the risk of being in complete agreement with everyone on the podcast, I mean that's absolutely right. What I would do is I would put in a few searches in relation to my area of expertise, or my business's product, service category, or whatever. I would see what sources are most frequently cited in relation to those, and then I would just cross-reference that against where I've historically been mentioned. And that's my list of sources that I would use for outreach, basically, to go out and talk about. Yeah, absolutely. My bit, all the rest of it. And I would focus.
And that's a rolling audit as well. Every 3 months to it. Yeah,
I would do that every 3 months. Yeah, absolutely, because we see that list will change, all the time. And then I would focus my efforts on definitely my owned presence, so that I am on the land that I own, as clearly articulating my expertise, my experience, my product, service, whatever it is, as clearly as I possibly can. But then absolutely earned, and I would be amplifying as much of that as I possibly could via social channels. And I think that's the kind of flywheel I would look to build were I looking to do this.
And when you're saying audit, if you do a Google search on yourself, you put it through incognito. Yeah. Do you have to do the same with ChatGPT or any of those? Is it through an incognito private browser window?
You can you could do that. To be honest, what I recommend to people to do more is to, and this is good practice actually, if you ever do any kind of audit on a GenAI platform, put a persona in there. So say, and the persona should be your ideal customer profile, right? So basically, say you're a health insurance business. So put a persona in that's like, I am a 20 to 30-year-old in good physical health, looking for the most cost-effective health insurance I can possibly get. Who would you recommend I use, for example, right? If you put a persona in there of your ideal customer profile, that can help positively influence the results towards your ideal user, and put a number of different personas in there based on the different ICPs that you might be targeting.
Yeah, nice.
Because
that's the discovery side.
100%, yeah. And then on the branded side, just put in a few, just to tell me everything you know about insert name or brand or whatever. And then
is Simon Murphy dodgy?
There would be no content in relation to
that. Nothing. Not a thing.
There's a whistle. Yeah.
But yeah, 100%. But and if it's a business that that you're representing in some way or another, ask questions in relation to the kind of key pillars of reputation. So quality of product or service, innovation, trustworthiness, governance, value for money, or
terrific,
or whatever those.
Terrific.
Kind of things. Yeah.
Lots of gold there, fellas. Lots of gold. Thank you for that. It just what my take out of all this is really there's an opportunity, and I think nimble players. It's no different for social media, for content when it first came in, for any of these advances in technology. Those that get in and learn it and have a crack tend to do better, and they can beat the big guys pretty easily, because the big guys are slower and more cumbersome. So it's not what is it? Not the size of the dog, but the size of the fight and the dog, or whatever.
Not the size of the dog in the fight, but the fight in the dog. That's one.
That's
of my
it. That's
sayings.
it.
Yeah.
I love that saying. Oh well, I did if I knew what it was. All right. Thanks, guys. Where's the best place for people to find you online, apart from ChatGPT?
I'm at Darryl Sparey on most channels, and hardnumbers.co.uk is the website for Hard Numbers.
And LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, Simon Murphy on LinkedIn and indigomurphy.com.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Pleasure,
Thanks
Trevor.
very much for your time. Really enjoyed the conversation.